Hi, good morning. Welcome to Books to Boardrooms with Dr. Kiran. Today I have the pleasure of having Samantha Keck. Samantha Keck is working as the head of corporate communications for emerging markets and Middle East and Africa at Goodyear Tires and Rubber Company. Samantha, welcome to my show.
Thank you.
It's a privilege to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. As you know that I basically started this channel for the student community to make them understand the various concepts and theories in different management or marketing field. So you work as the communications head. So can you just throw a little light on what exactly is the role of a communications head and what is communication and how it is important for an organization?
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. Very privileged to be here and share a bit about communications from my experience. I would say, first of all, being a communicator is not being the marketer, as we would understand it, because there's always a little bit of gray area between marketing and communications, and then there is a certain field called marcoms, which adds to the little bit of confusion sometimes. So I would say that in my job as a communicator, in one word, probably hashtag storyteller. I tell, in my job, my main function is that I tell the story of the company. I tell the story of the company's mission, its values, obviously the products as well, the solutions they sell, internally to our employees, and of course externally to our audience, to our customers, and basically to everybody, to society. So yes.
So when you say you're a storyteller talking about the company's vision, values, etc., so how you do that internally? So when you said how important is the internal organizational employees need to understand what the organization is standing for. So can you just throw some light in terms of how you do that? What are the strategies you adopt to communicate? And when the organization is large, spread across different parts of the world. So how you do that?
I would take a step back from that and say that all communication, increasingly, all internal is external communication. Because if you think about it, you and I, even if we work in a company, we are also consumers. So I think the first strategy or the first kind of rule of thumb for any kind of internal communication is that it's got to be consistent with what the company is saying externally. So let's say, for instance, whatever we tell our employees internally, which would be, except for real HR stuff like your common ban and that sort of thing, which is very, I would say, limits to basically a policy. All the messaging that we pass to our employees internally, like for instance, every company wants to be the employer of choice, and then to be the employer of choice, we are also, we value our employees because they are assets and all. That same employer of choice messaging that we pass internally has to be consistent with what we say externally. Externally, the company values its employees, we value diversity, we are inclusive, and so on and so forth. When it comes to passing messages internally to employees, obviously when you have your HR memos, when you have your policies and all, it's official. There are official channels of communication. They will be through the emailing system or the policies that are uploaded onto the intranet that's basically behind firewalls and closed loops that are accessible only by employees. But I will also bring our attention back to the fact that increasingly social media is becoming an important tool for internal communications. Used to be, it's public and therefore it's external. And in most people's minds, there was a clear kind of line of divide between tools you use internally and tools you use externally. I think that line, again, is getting increasingly blurred because of social media. And I think in the enterprise setting, like especially for PMEBs, it would definitely be LinkedIn. Nowadays, you see, I give kudos to so-and-so, my coworker, for being, a great team member. And as an enterprise, as a company, from an internal comm point of view, we actually do encourage it, because from what we see, it encourages cohesion among employees, and it gives employees a bit of empowerment as well. that is not just about listening and following instructions, where employees are, having the chance and the opportunity to use social media to say good work, or I have a great team member. It actually helps human resources. It actually helps company cohesion. It actually helps company employee engagement.
Oh, so this is actually the role of the communications head. I was thinking that it is more of an HR conduct these activities. So
I would say as functions, because functions like HR, like communications, in actual fact, we work very closely together, and it's almost like hand in glove. We don't work kind of alien from one another, because ultimately we're trying to get to the same group of people. And it's also, if we talk about employee engagement, a large part of it is about employee empowerment. How do we make the employee feel comfortable? How do we make the employee feel more like a family, more like a team? And this is where HR policies and communicating the right way to them has to work hand in glove.
so when it comes to more of an internal communication, the priority is more to work with HR of communicating the policies and again the values, and so that the employee output will be much better and everybody works towards a common goal. So what about external communication? So who are the major stakeholders in external communication? What are the key mediums and the messages you communicate, the various messages and the medium which you choose to communicate with the stakeholders?
So let's talk about external communication messaging. Again, coming back to what I said very early on, internal is external. So if internally we celebrate our teams for great work done, great product, innovation, that same message is translated externally. And I would say, rather than, obviously when we do Marcoms, for instance, which is external communications, the drive, the push is to push a product, to push the benefits of the product and all, and basically the value add of the product. Ultimately, there is, in terms of marketing, a consumer group, a target consumer, a target buyer group that's already been done. But ultimately, it's also about that same message has to appeal to everyone, to you and I, for instance. If, let's say, I buy a certain grocery, for instance, and of course, in my other role as a homemaker, I would also say it's about the value for money that I pay and all, but I also look at what's been pushed out to me as the consumer, to what's the health benefits of this grocery and stuff like that. But for, let's say, the other members of the family, it affects them as well. So whatever kind of messaging that goes out externally, obviously it's targeted to an audience, to a buyer group, and so on and so forth. But the larger message has to kind of have a bit of appeal and be understood by the community at large. So if we say internal communications, everybody is the stakeholder inside. External communications, you almost cannot define a stakeholder group. You might be able to define the buyer group, but the message of, let's say, environmentally conscious affects everybody. In terms of platforms, for instance, obviously you have your press releases, you have the social media, you have ads, you have, all the audio-visual stuff that you can think of. But I think if we're looking at especially right now, where the consumer is also, in essence, an author or a journalist, we have the citizen journalists nowadays. I would say that the medium has really kind of everywhere. And most importantly, even though it's very hard to do research on it, word of mouth is actually a very dependable, I won't say dependable because you have your likes and your dislikes and all that, but it is a very important medium for any enterprise and for any messaging going out.
I think, see, when you told about that word of mouth, the consumer feedback and customer being the external, because the external engagement with the customers is not that great, it can impact the performance of the brand. And at one point of time, the communication is one way. You release a press release, people have only the option to read it and cannot react to that.
Right.
But today with social media, the customer can reach an organization or a company based anywhere in the world.
Correct.
Because every organization got its own social media platforms.
Correct.
And a post it must be seen, and brands take a lot of time in creating a follower community.
Correct.
And someone says something bad can impact, because
Yes.
negatives get highlighted a lot, people will talk about it, create a discussion. So what is the role of you being a communication head in these type of scenarios where if there's a negative comments or some comments to be taken action, so how as an organization or how you as a communication head take action in these scenarios?
So obviously and like you said, social media is everywhere. Social media is every second of the day. As a comms head, one of the main responsibility is a judgment call on whether the enterprise needs to react. Because as we all know, haters are going to hate. That's number one. But the other side of the coin is also that this is where the company's values, this is where the company's promise of delivery, this is where the company's promise of quality product comes into play, and is actually fundamental to supporting the kind of mitigation strategies and actions that a comms head and a comms department needs to put in place. If a company does indeed do what it says it does, the quality of the product is indeed what it says it is, you have a reputation that actually not exactly bulletproof at that point, but you have you have a defense that's able to withstand this sort of, I would say, attacks in this case. And with the solid ground of your quality, your mission, your people, and what the company has delivered so far, the comms head at that point, at any kind of mitigation action, whether it's a crisis comm, whether it's reputational defense, or whether it's a kind of social media response, we have to be backed up by something. As a comms head, I cannot defend on hot air, if I may be so bold to say that. Yes.
So then it becomes very important. Like for example, internal communication, when you talked about employee engagement, a lot of organizations are facing that as a challenge, the engagement level from employees coming down. External communication, again, the image of the company in the minds of the people. So, you play a very important role as communications head to ensure these two things are, engagement level goes high, the second side, the image goes high. In this case, is there any specific tools to measure your effectiveness and impact of a communication head in any organization? How it is measured?
So obviously you have all your internal comms, for instance, which is a reflection of how engaged the employees are and how much they believe in your mission and all that. You have your pulse check surveys. Every enterprise does either an annual or twice a year pulse check survey to see how well employees know the mission, the vision, and at a certain point the products as well. And then externally, there's always a share of voice. Is it positive? Is it negative? And of course, you also do surveys among the crowds and see what's their reaction, like what we say about brand equity, right? How do they view your brand? That is a direct consumer feedback on how much they believe the brand story as well. So there are matrices available. And that's why, coming back to when we first started the conversation, what is internal is external, because you never know if your employee is going to be on the street taking the brand survey check that the company has put together. And then and having a consistent story for the employee, for the audience, external audience, is in this case a very important measure, important action. So if you want to achieve the strategy of bringing up generally the engagement, the awareness, and the brand story.
I think it's always to say that if you cannot measure it, there's no point in doing something. So good that you have some tools for measuring both internal and external. One last question.
Sure.
Considering this a very key position for any organization as the reputation, brand image, everything is depending upon how well the consistency of story and how good the story is. So if I ask if any of the student community who really want to take up this role, what are the, can you say around 2 or 3 key capabilities or skills they should possess to be a great communications head?
I think this is going to sound kind of blah, but always listen. Always have the ability to listen, and more importantly, listen and ask questions. I'm very fortunate that over the years in my career, in my experiences among different companies, my mentors have always said one thing that was actually consistent: no stupid questions. If you don't understand, just ask. And that, in a way, I come back to, it's also employee empowerment and engagement. If I'm able to ask a question of whatever I don't understand, I trust the person I work with. I'm able to get the answers. I know better. To be a communicator, if you know better, if you're able to ask questions, and if you stay curious, this comes to the next part of being a communicator. You create content that ultimately hits the audience. For any messaging to be effective, it's always what's in it for them. So if you ask the right questions, if you put yourself out of the equation, if you're able to have a message that resonates, you are a successful communicator.
So it's a great listening, the capability of asking the right question and having the great curiosity are the three
Yes.
things you think. Thanks a lot, Samantha,
you.
for sharing this valuable experience, and hope to see you guys soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good day.